You can get the microphones. Okay, there we go.
If I could call this meeting of the SFMTA Board of Directors to order. Ms. Boomer, would you please call the roll?
All right, we will pause. Director Brinkman.
Present.
Brinkman present. Director Eakin.
Here.
Eakin present. Director Heinecke.
Present.
Heinecke present. Director Hemminger.
Here.
Hemminger present. Director Rubke.
Here.
Rubke present. Director Torres.
Here.
Torres present. Directors, please be advised that Director Borden is here and just out of the room
Yes.
for a quick moment.
She has put her stuff down. Let's mark her as present.
Item 3, announcement of prohibition of sound-producing devices during the meeting. Please be advised that the ringing of and use of cell phones, pagers, and other similar sound-producing devices are prohibited at the meeting. The chair may order the removal from the meeting of any person responsible for one going off in the room. Item 4, communications. Directors and members of the audience, please be advised that the emergency exits are to the right and to the left in the hallway just off the lobby. For members of the board, there is an exit right here to the emergency exit here. In addition, restrooms, when standing in the lobby, the restrooms are to the left, and you should go past the showers. There's a sign on the wall that shows you there they are.
Unless you're on fire.
The showers are locked, the restrooms are not. Mr. Chair, that is all that I have for you with regard to communications.
Very good. And Vice Chair Borden is now in the room, so please do mark her present.
Yeah.
And I will move on to item number 6.
Actually, Mr. Chair, item 5,
Oh.
Citizens Advisory Council
Excuse me.
report.
Yes.
There is no report today.
All right. Like I said, I'll move on to item number 6.
Item 6, presentation and discussion regarding the state of San Francisco, including land use growth, economic conditions, policy priorities, and financial responsibilities of the SFMTA.
So on my thing, I have an item 6, which is a welcome and purpose statement from our new DOT. Am I reading off the wrong agenda?
That is part of the item that I just read.
Wonderful. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Needless to say, this is a very exciting week in the history of San Francisco transit, and all of us are eagerly looking forward to tomorrow and the upgrades to our better, really magnificent Market Street. And I will note that some of the seeds for that were sown in a workshop just like this many years ago. This is also an exciting time for this agency and for transit around the Bay because we have a new superstar serving as the Director of Transportation. This is his first workshop like this in that capacity. So let me welcome Director Tumlin to this workshop and turn the floor over to him.
Good morning, directors. I am very excited to begin 7 hours of amazingly nerdy discussion about our budget. This is incredibly important work. As I've said before, the only useful statement of any organization's values is its budget. So the work we're about to embark upon today is important and will guide the agency's investments for the next 2 years. And so we've developed this workshop around a couple of key themes. One of those key themes is a continual reference back to our organizations and particularly the city's values. We have very difficult choices to make. We have limited financial resources, we have limited street rights of way, and we have to choose how to allocate our limited resources in order to best serve the public good. That requires a clear definition of what we mean by the public good and direction from you all about how we deal with the inevitable tensions and trade-offs that we face as an agency. So in each of the presentations you will hear throughout the day, there will be reference back to our city's values and asking you all for direction on how we deal with those inevitable tensions and trade-offs. Another key theme that you'll be hearing throughout the day is about data and transparency. We can only manage this agency if we've got good data about our performance. We can only build trust with you all and our residents and the elected officials and the electorate if we are fully transparent about our performance, including all of the ways in which we are failing to live up to our city's values. And so another theme that you will hear throughout the presentations today is the ways in which we are failing, the ways in which we are not living up to our own expectations for ourselves. So you'll see data that does not reflect well upon us. But another theme that you will see that emerged actually as staff were pulling together their work for these presentations is that for everything that the SFMTA is actually investing in, we are getting extraordinarily good performance. And so with that, I'd like to provide just a little bit of introduction, including running through the workshop agenda. So after my introduction, we're going to do a little Oprah talk show with John Ram, the city planning director, controller Ben Rosenfield, and the mayor's chief of staff, Sean Ellsbernd. Our planning director, Sarah Jones, and her team will present the 2019 Travel Decision Survey, sort of citywide look at how are we doing in terms of mode split, travel behavior, and overall system performance. Then our Sustainable Streets Director and Transit Director, Tom McGuire and Julie Kirschbaum, will talk about the strategic challenges that both transit and streets are facing. The budget team, including Leo Levinson, Jonathan Ruers, will talk about the financial challenges that the agency is experiencing even in a boom economy. That budget team will come back and talk about the state of our assets and also try to understand why in a boom economy our structural deferred maintenance gap continues to grow. Then there'll be a series of presentations based upon the strategic plan goals that you adopted last year, including safety, travel choices, livability, and service delivery. And then finally, we'll have a conversation about the budget, because we can't get to the charts of numbers until we understand what exactly it is that we're trying to achieve. We'll then do some sum up, and in between each section, there will be opportunities for both you and the public to comment and ask questions upon the teams that are there. So as I mentioned, at the largest level, for almost everything that we are trying to do as an agency, we are failing. Injuries and fatalities are up. Congestion is up significantly. Transit speed and reliability are down, and as a result of that, transit ridership is down. We are worsening on our goals of creating mode shift in order to ensure that our streets can move more people even as the city grows. We are moving in the opposite direction. As the city is growing, our streets are serving fewer people, not more. These are huge, huge challenges. And a lot of the challenges are a result of the fact that we operate in a traditional boom-bust economy. Jobs are way up. Since 2011, San Francisco and San Mateo counties have added 2,000 new jobs every single month. And of course, while adding all those jobs, we've only been producing about 400 housing units. And so one of the themes that we see throughout our work is that while the medical industry is responsible for cleaning up after some of our policy and design failures, we in the transportation industry have to clean up for the mess of failed regional housing policies. And this is really at the root of so many of our problems. It is at the root of the congestion that we're experiencing downtown. It's at the root of the fact that the Bay Bridge and BART trains are crush loaded. It is also at the root of many of our service delivery problems that begin with the fact that while we're increasing wages, wage growth is not keeping up with the growth in the cost of housing. And our operators, we're having a very difficult time hiring bus operators, maintenance workers, parking control officers, administrative staff, because of the grueling commute that has become necessitated by the growing regional jobs housing imbalance. We're also finding, as you're all experiencing, that the congestion is not only driving down auto speeds, but also transit speeds. And of course, in addition to the jobs housing imbalance resulting in significant traffic issues, so has the impact of ride-hail. I know that you've all seen that data. It's been an interesting phenomenon that we've been tracking over the last couple of years. That said, what is fascinating to me as we parse the data and look at performance on individual streets, on individual transit lines, every single place that the SFMTA has invested in the last 2 years, we have seen extraordinarily positive results. This is particularly true on the Muni Rapid network, where ridership is up dramatically from 28, 37% to on Fulton Street, ridership being up 60%, in part because travel times have been cut by 12%. We're also seeing significant improvements in safety outcomes every place that our Vision Zero team is working, with the very controversial clear zones that were created on El Taraval having resulted in 0 injuries since we've done them on what had previously been a key part of the high injury network. Moreover, where we're investing in protected facilities for people on bikes and on micromobility, we're seeing dramatic increases in ridership. And those increases in bike ridership are resulting in expanded person capacity of those roadways. By accommodating people on bikes and micromobility, we can move 10 times as many people per square foot of roadway. And so one of the things that we want to do is to focus on where we have been successful and to remove the obstacles for speeding up the delivery of our successful work. And so that requires clarity about what we're trying to achieve as an agency. It requires deep clarity about knowing the tools that are necessary in order to allow our streets to move more people as the city's jobs and population increase. That means understanding the basic math of mobility. I'm not a better person when I take the bus, but I take up 1/10 of the roadway space as I do when I drive a car or ride in the back of a Lyft. And so understanding that basic math and prioritizing the most efficient modes of transportation is going to be essential for continuing San Francisco's economic success. And this means making sure that the modes of transportation that are most space efficient are not stuck in congestion. And this is particularly true for transit. Designing our streets that serve our primary transit routes to protect our buses and trains from recurring congestion and to protect them from pointless stopping at red lights is going to be a key part of our work. It's the 1,000 small projects and 1,000 small changes that have driven our success on corridors like the Fulton Street corridor, where we've seen such amazing gains. There wasn't a big capital investment. That was a lot of fine-tuning by staff. It means that we're actually going to have to get really serious about addressing social equity. Transportation is the fastest driver of opportunity, and we have an opportunity to correct for some of the mistakes that our industry has made in the past. Our industry prioritized funding major capital projects like highways when those highways removed blight, and blight was defined as African American, Latino, Asian, and Jewish ownership. We've got a responsibility to correct for the historic inequities that our industry has inflicted upon our communities and to equalize opportunity for all San Franciscans, particularly those who are the most vulnerable and who have the fewest choices. We also need to get serious about how we manage our infrastructure, particularly infrastructure like parking. Parking is a critical way that we can manage congestion. Parking is also a critical way that can help us drive small business success by managing parking to ensure that customers can always find a space at all times of day or night. This means supporting our sister agency, the San Francisco County Transportation Authority, in their efforts to pursue using mobility pricing as a tool for managing congestion. Indeed, it is clear from the science that there are only 2 things that we can do to have a serious impact on congestion. One is to destroy our economy, as Detroit successfully did to reduce its congestion, or to see
I
congestion.
don't think you need direction, but we're going to not like that option. So proceed to number 2, Director.
So the other option is recognizing that congestion is not an infrastructure problem, but an economic problem. Congestion is simply what happens when the demand for mobility equals the supply. And for every other commodity in our society, we use price to balance supply and demand. In mobility, we charge people with their time. And that needs to change if we want the streets to be able to move more people. We also know that the only thing that really makes a difference in getting more people out on micro-mobility devices, and again, creating much greater efficiency in our transportation system, is providing protected space for them to ride in and targeting not just riders like me, but people with families, older adults, children, people with disabilities, making sure that the transportation system is designed not for the convenience of the privileged, but for the protection of those who are most vulnerable. We're going to also need a lot of tools to help manage the system, including a new train control system to allow us to get the most out of the subway. You'll be hearing later about some of the very significant hiring problems that we have within the agency, including the hundreds and hundreds of vacancies that are preventing us from delivering the service that we have promised. We're going to need a significant amount of effort in helping to fix our human resources department and to look at what else we can do to attract and retain the best talent. And finally, a big part of our work in order to get all of this done is making sure that in attracting the best talent, that we do so by creating the most welcoming and inclusive work environment in the country. This is San Francisco, and there is no excuse for a work environment that does not welcome everyone for their talents and never diminish them for their individual qualities. So we've got some pretty straightforward goals that we have pulled from previous work and measures that have been adopted by the San Francisco voters and the Board of Supervisors, as well as direction from the mayor. But we also have some significant obstacles that we need to face. One of those is cultural in San Francisco. While there is widespread agreement in San Francisco about our larger values around equity and the environment and the economy, those values break down when it comes to dealing with that particular parking space in front of my house, or allowing newcomers to move into my neighborhood as opposed to somebody else's neighborhood. This is going to be perhaps the greatest challenge that you all as board members will face, is when it comes down to those specific trade-offs that are necessary in order to achieve our larger goals, but that may have impacts on specific blocks and on specific streets. We, as I already mentioned, have a significant staffing shortage that is exacerbated by our strong economy and the affordability crisis. And we also have a set of challenges that the public, because they use the transportation system every day, it's easy for our public to think that they understand the complexity of the issues. Our industry is an Alice in Wonderland kind of world where issues like adding a traffic lane to the highway would seemingly reduce congestion, but in fact has the opposite effect. These opposite effect problems are rife throughout the work that we're doing, and it requires a greater understanding of the public. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to invite up, if they are all here, Planning Director John Ram, Controller Ben Rosenfield, and might actually not be able to join us today, given the challenges of managing city government.
Solve those in 25 minutes.
Now, this is the Oprah-style event, part of the presentation?
That's right.
Okay, but just to be clear, we're not giving away any cars. A, can't afford it, and B, that would be anti-mission.
There might be a fast pass.
Fast pass. Why not they'll give away a fast pass?
Or the car.
You get a free. Get a fast pass.
Singles on wheels, look out.
I know.
Good morning. Good morning.
So good morning, gentlemen. So I've got a couple of preparatory questions, but this is really a time for the board members to ask questions of you. So John, as I already stated, At the root of so many of our transportation problems are our housing shortage, much of which is structural. Right now, San Francisco has more housing units in production and in the pipeline than it has for decades. And yet, if those are completed, it's still just a drop in the bucket given the need. Why is it so difficult to build housing in a city where it is so easy to create jobs?
I have 20 minutes, not 20 hours. Talk about this. So first, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for recognizing the incredible and inextricable connection between land use and transportation. It's something that took us a long time to get to, so I'm glad that we're having this discussion. To your question, I think there's multiple answers to that question. I think the fundamental sort of high-level answer to that question is that we are one municipality out of 101 in the region. The region is not 9 counties that control land use, it's 101 municipalities that control land use. And every single one of those has their own attitude about whether housing is a good idea or not. And many of them, the answer to that question is no. So we are in this situation where even if, and you know, there's this lot of discussion, there's this belief among some folks that if we don't build housing, they won't come. And that's simply not the case. And if you look at the city's population growth versus the city's housing growth, you can see the inequities there, and the fact that the city's population is growing much faster. And setting aside even jobs for a minute, the city's population grows much faster than our ability to produce housing. So, I mean, all these factors, and why is it so hard to build housing? There's not a single answer. People blame me and zoning. I think that is a frankly small part of the problem. We have approved 52,000 housing units, of which 10,000 are under construction. There's a total of 72,000, I think, in the pipeline right now. Including that 52,000, we have about 20,000 under review. But for a number of reasons, a large number of units, whether they're in the big projects, the big multi-building projects that require a whole lot of work and institutional investors to get built, or other projects that are being affected by construction costs, or by lawsuits. I mean, it's a combination of all those things that are affecting our ability to build housing right now. And it's also because we're not building housing in places where it needs to get built as a region.
Let me turn it over to Ben Rosenfeld, the city controller, and ask you a question, then turn it over to the board for more questions. So San Francisco is one of the wealthiest cities in the world. We are at the absolute peak of an almost unprecedented boom economy, and yet the city budget is starting with a massive deficit this year. And we as an agency are struggling to keep up as well. How is this even possible? That with the amount of wealth that this region is generating, that we are so starved for resources to be able to provide basic services as a government agency. What's going on?
Sure. A couple points that speak to that. So I think we're talking about the general fund side of the city's budget here, and we produce a forecast each year of the next 4, and we project kind of growing imbalances between projected revenues and expenditures for the city. I wouldn't call it massive. I think that's an important thing to remember. The city's general fund budget is about $6 billion. Our forecast for the next 2-year budget comes to around $500 million over that 2 years. So it's about a 4% difference per year growing between revenues and expenditures. Still meaningful. And the continuing and yawning gap between those lines as you get further out is actually of more concern to me than in the shorter term. How does that happen? Predominantly it happens because we've made commitments and promises that as they come online in coming years will drive expenditures faster than revenues, even in good times and even absent a recession. Those really take a number of different forms, but most significantly for me are a number of different voter initiatives that we've sent to the ballot in the last 5 or 6 years of this recession, or of this boom. that phase in over coming periods, baselines for new city services, increases to baselines, and not all of those costs, not all of those promises have come online yet. So those are driving revenues. We have a number of promises as well to our employees for long-term benefits, pension and retiree health, that continue to grow at faster rates than inflation. And so that's kind of on the expenditure side. On the revenue side, we've got a couple of things going on, and I think this is somewhat germane to some of your discussion here today. The mayor and the board have done better during this cycle than in prior cycles I've been through in terms of how they've managed some of these things. But nonetheless, during booms, certain very volatile and one-time revenues manifest, and the caution is to not plow those in and park them under your operating budget. And commercial property transfer tax, in particular in the city, has boomed. Savings that we've accumulated when revenue news is better than expected is the other. Those are the two most volatile revenue sources, fund balance and transfer tax for us. And we have about $500 million of those sources sitting under our operating budget at this point. And so when we pair that with what we're forecasting, which is continued growth but slowing growth during the forecast period, revenue growth cools, these commitments continue to grow and come online, and these volatile sources moderate down to historical levels. And all of those three factors together kind of drive revenues and expenditures in different directions.
Directors, do you have questions for our planning director? And
I have a planning note, which is Sean Ellsburn is in the lobby. So if you've got something bad to say about the mayor's office, you might want to hurry up with that. But he will be here shortly.
Thank you.
So I will pause. Directors, are there any questions thus far on the presentation from our two guests? Director Brinkman.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both. Director Ram, one of the things that I hear frequently about a reason not to build more housing is because transit's full and we can't accommodate any more people. People say that also about bringing new cars into a neighborhood. We don't want more people trying to park their cars. Do you know of any city that's either taken that head on and just addressed that problem by providing more transit and providing more efficient transit, or conversely, any city that's built more and then found themselves just unable to accommodate the population?
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say that many cities are dealing with this problem right now. It's not kind of disinvestment. If you look at what's happening in New York and Washington and Boston, sort of disinvestment or lack of investment in transit upgrades. But I also think it's locational, right? And I think that's where some of our challenges are. It's not only it's a regional issue, but people don't live their lives based on city municipal boundaries, and so when you look at the west side of San Francisco, particularly in areas like the Sunset, the commission recently approved a 20-unit building in the Sunset that was more units that had been built in the outer Sunset in 10 years. And I keep thinking, well, why is that the case? And I think it's related to transportation, because it's faster to get into. And I think one of the reasons that you see so much housing being built in Oakland right now is that the transit times are half of what they are from the outer Sunset. And so clearly, if you could throw the Judah underground and do 4-car trains and get it to downtown, I think you see a lot more housing built in the Sunset. I don't know of any city that's done it a whole lot better than we have, to be frank. I think Boston, because their transit system is, I think, one of the oldest on the planet, they've been able to kind of have a more dispersed transit system that's less centrally focused and more on the region. But you have to look to European examples, I think, to look at how cities have done this in a kind of broader basis, like Paris, where virtually every part of the city is served that well. But it is, most of the American systems are based on kind of the spoke system that comes into the core of our city. And as our cities have grown, that's created more of a problem, I think.
So thank you very much for that. With that, we'll welcome Sean Ellsburn, who is the mayor's chief of staff. Before that, served Senator Feinstein. Before that was District 7 supervisor, so he knows these issues very well. We just got a little bit of an overview of the connection between housing policy and transit and the economy of the city and how that's forecasting and how that affects transit. So there was a question, I saw a hand go up.
I just
Director
want to say
Torres.
to John, thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
So On that, I have a question that gets a little bit more to a focus policy, which I think it's important for board members to understand, and it's taken me a little while to understand it. I'm not sure I fully do, but thank you as well for being here. Thank you all three. We know you're busy running the city. So we, as a transit agency, make priority decisions all the time. We say this street is going to be set with a red carpet because we're going to prioritize people who ride transit over people who drive cars. Parking decisions, lots of this are priority decisions. We've heard a lot about the fact that housing is a real obstacle and housing prices to our hiring needs, that we can't hire operators and that people who might be good candidates to work for us are sort of discouraged by the price of housing. And over my tenure on this board, I've heard proposals about, you know, maybe housing set-asides for people who are going to operate our transit. Similar proposals for police officers, teachers, using our ability to zone to promote folks who get us around safely, keep us safe, put out our fires, and teach our children. You know, using that to prioritize perhaps economic advantage to them. But I understand there are very significant obstacles to that. So I wondered if I could put upon you to sort of explain the obstacles and explain if you think there are some ways that agencies who need to hire more could overcome those obstacles to provide prioritized housing here or near to their folks.
That's a big question. I mean, I think fundamentally there's fair housing laws which prevent us, federal fair housing laws, which prevent us from setting aside housing for certain types, for specified groups of people. So there are exceptions to that, such as there is the ability with land that's owned by the school district to set aside housing for teachers and people who work in the school district system. One solution might be for the MTA to buy and develop its own housing, if you want to get into the housing market. But fair housing laws are fundamentally, I think, one of the key issues here. And then I think, frankly, it is the discussion about who is most in need. We have a lot of discussion in this city right now about providing housing for low-income populations versus middle-income populations. Almost no one is building housing for middle-income folks right now. Because lower-income housing can be more heavily subsidized through federal tax credit programs and so on. And the market is not able to bring in middle-income housing in a way that actually makes the numbers work. It's a similar argument, you know, and we're constantly kind of discussing who is most in need of providing housing. My take is that those two factors are the primary reason why we don't create housing for policemen and muni drivers and whoever else and set aside those kinds of housing developments.
I was going to just add the cost of housing and of prices in the Bay Area is certainly an impediment to attracting the workforce we need to run the city. I think it's also important to note, though, that it's not the only and it's often not the chief challenge we have with filling vacancies. We had the benefit of working with the team here for the better part of 6 months on kind of getting under the hood of some of the challenges that Muni faces. And I was struck during that process by the fact that for transit operators in particular, the predominant challenges we have with transit operators at the moment, and we certainly have a very significant gap between what we have on board, the people we have on board, and those we need. It's not a problem of applicants in that part of the world. It's a problem of just simply processing people through the process fast enough. It's of navigating civil service rules and the rest. And so while I do think there are these macro level issues that need long-term attention, the challenges that face you, I think, as an agency in the shorter term are not those, or those are not the number one priority. They really simply need to be working through the city's HR processes more quickly.
Right.
Not that that's easy, but.
Right. So much like we've moved to quick builds with some of our upgrades on the roads, we need a quick hire process. All right.
I want to make sure that we have a chance for Sean Ellsburn to speak.
Yeah, if I could just jump onto Commissioner Heineke's question. One of the mayor's big priorities that she would love to be a partner with the agency on is to follow up on John's point, love to work with you on your own property. What we can do with some of your property and where we can build housing. I think there has been discussion, it's at the Potrero Yard, talking there, but any resources we have with John's department, with our Office of Economic and Workforce Development Department, anything we can bring to the table to assist you in that effort, she would make it a priority.
So Sean, speaking of priorities, I want to make sure that you have the chance to talk about one of the key themes of this workshop, which is the city's values. In order for us to make difficult decisions about how to allocate limited resources, we need clarity about values, and our mayor is clear about her values. Can you tell us any guidance that you might give us about her direction for how we prioritize our limited resources?
Sure. The word you hear the mayor use, I think I've heard Jeff use, I've heard a lot of people use that is important to her, it's just unraveling it, is the word equity. Making sure the resources that we have are properly distributed amongst those who most need it. But where I'd first want to start is, let's start within the department. Let's start, before we get to where service is going, let's start within the department. Making sure that employees are treated in an equitable manner. Making sure that they have the resources they need to thrive is a very important element of what the mayor wants to achieve in her term as mayor. She's had that conversation, I know, with you, Jeff, and certainly has had it in partnership with the Department of Human Resources to talk about it from a citywide perspective. But that is very important, and that would also get to some of the findings that Ben and the controller's team came to about transit operators and doing what we can to make sure that you all have the resources to attract and fill those spots. And then from there, we can take that to service delivery. And really what it gets to is making sure we're able to provide service to those communities that most need it, and really and to define need to those who don't have access to other forms of transportation, where really public transportation is their means of living and thriving, and making sure that we are prioritizing their needs. That would be her priority.
Board members, any other questions?
I have a question.
Please.
So in balancing those needs that you just discussed and in looking at the projection for kind of on the city level, an increase in funding needs and a decrease, like our revenues and expenditures are kind of separating. We talk a lot about our fare policies, and we've been getting, requests from members of the public and others to kind of stop our indexing in terms of our incremental increases. Do any of you have opinions on those issues, how we balance the needs of people who are genuinely facing affordability issues and our need to fund our transportation system?
Do you favor higher fares, is what she's asking.
I didn't step backwards, so I guess I think it's striking, looking at recent revenue history at the MTA, the proportion of your budget that's supported by the general fund at this point, as opposed to revenues within the control of the MTA. It's risen significantly. The only real revenue growth you've seen for the last several years has been increased support from the city itself in the form of higher baselines, while your own revenue sources have been largely stagnant. I don't think that's an operating model that will work for the MTA longer term, from my perspective. I think you need to seek revenue options or new revenues to support transit that are independent and don't come at the expense of the rest of the government. At this point, Muni is receiving, or the MTA is receiving, about 1 of every 5 tax dollars that we receive in the city in the form of that support. I think that's the highest level of general fund support of any transit agency that I've seen in terms of operating support. And I don't think kind of relying on that for the long-term transit needs we have in the city is going to be sustainable.
And I will say, for the education of our new board members, the indexing policy is relatively new. It came on during my tenure. And one of the reasons we did it was for customer certainty, so that folks could know what was going on. And frankly, one of the reasons we did it was to avoid a very, very difficult discussion every time the cycle came through, where someone would seek preference this way, someone would seek preference this way, and it became almost politically impossible to navigate that. So we moved to the indexing system, and that's what we have now. Anyone else wish to comment on that item? Okay, I just want to make sure that the reporter knows that our planning director advocated 4-car N trains. I can't build you a tunnel, but we can get you 4 cars out there. So I want to make sure everybody heard that. Director Heminger.
Sean, I just wanted to say it's really encouraging to hear what you said about the mayor and our transportation assets and the role they could play in new housing. I think we talked about that last week at our meeting, so that's nice encouragement. We'll take you up on the offer. And John, I did want to thank you as well for your career in leadership, and it hasn't just been in San Francisco, it's been regionally. And John has been one of the voices for regional approaches to this problem. And Ben, I'll just save the easy question for you. When's the next recession?
He's got his broker on the
We
line.
do a
so
lot
answer
of,
flows.
we're now 10 years into this recovery, which means it's the longest period of economic expansion in U.S. history, which means to people like me that we're overdue. We prepare forecasts of revenues that occur in a recession just so we're prepared when one should occur. We don't forecast recessions. I think our feeling today versus this time last year, I think when we were here, is that the recession risk feels lower today than it did 12 months ago, meaning in the next 12 to 24 months, kind of macro U.S. fundamentals look better than they did 12 months ago. I'll also note that we've been surprised, like most economists and forecasters, during each of the last two recessions, though. So nothing we're planning for in the immediate term, but being prepared for one when it occurs, it should be a key part of what the board's thinking about.
And if I just could, this year's budget for the city is going to be more difficult than certainly last year's, and I think it's fair to say certainly more difficult than, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but that the Board of Supervisors has had to deal with in 5 years comfortably. So in other words, other than maybe Supervisor Peskin, there is no member of the Board of Supervisors that's dealt with the budget as difficult as this one will be. It pales in comparison to some of the difficulty we faced 10 plus years ago. But next year's does not look any better right now. This is going to be a challenge. So maybe we're not recession, but the numbers, we are not in the same place we were last year. We are steps backward from where we were last year.
And Chair, we have time for one more question.
It's a two-part question. One is, I was looking recently at the 2018 Commerce and Industry Index that the Planning Department recently released, and I noticed that a couple of things. One, that there was a huge drop-off in 2018 from the TDIF funds from the previous year, and I was wondering what was the cause of that. And then the second thing is that I noticed that on average, city revenues increased from 2017 to 2018 about 10%. And I just wanted to know what percentage of those revenues are just the ballot measure stuff versus just actual growth in department spending or other expenses.
So the first part of the question was
The TDIF fee was down significantly to 2018.
related to
And that
new
would
development.
be transit impact development fee.
Yeah.
Right. That is my guess is that is primarily due to the fact that a lot of housing developments are not moving forward because they're not penciling. And the reason they're not penciling is a complicated factor, but it's primarily because construction costs are going up every year dramatically, and housing costs actually have flattened out for the last 3 years. Even though housing is absurdly expensive in this city and in this region, it has essentially not increased in about 3 years. So you have increasing costs and flattening revenues for projects, and that's causing them not to go forward. So the TIDF is paid not when a project is approved, but when somebody pulls a construction permit. So unless they go forward to physical construction, those fees are not paid.
And I think the second part of the question was just the extraordinary level of revenue growth we saw in 2018. Yes. It's really being predominantly driven from two revenue sources for the city. One is property tax, no surprise, which makes up about a third of our revenue base. And you have there kind of a lot of changes in ownerships and things being brought online and assessed at current market value, plus the assessor's office for the first time really in a generation, fully clearing a backlog of supplemental bills. And so they've been kind of working through this backlog. Carmen Chu, our assessor, over the last 18 months has really caught that up. And so those two things together pushed our property tax base up by about 10% in that year. Property taxes in the city have grown by 20% over 2 years, which makes us the fastest growing county in the state, which is pretty remarkable for a fully built out urban core. And then the second one in 2018 is business tax. And just, our business tax is based upon a lot of different inputs. But to give a sense of just how extraordinary 2018 was, private sector compensation, wages and and other compensation paid to all workers in the city grew by 20% in 2018.
Crazy.
And half of that was in 10 companies. And so those two factors together really have driven the city's revenue picture in that year.
All right, well, we've already told Jeff he can't destroy the economy to help transit, so we'll deal with those things. And on a serious note, let me just say thank you to the three of you. Obviously, this agency can't do it alone, and that your willingness to be here today, your willingness over the years to partner with us, with this board, has been remarkable. Obviously, this board is committed to change, committed to really looking forward. That's why we brought in Director Tumlin as our new Director of Transportation, and I know the three of you will work cooperatively with him. I know you know him from the past already, but so thank you in advance for doing that, and thank you for being here. Ms. Boomer, I believe it's appropriate to go to public comment on this item now. Am I correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on matters that were just discussed, not on other matters on today's agenda. If anyone wishes to speak, if you would please step to the podium.
Okay, seeing no one coming forward. Oh,
There is.
all right,
Okay.
we have one public comment, and after that, is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Okay, seeing none, we'll have one and only one public commenter. Oh, okay, we have two. Very good. 2 minutes, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Edward Mason. There was no mention made of Senate Bill 50 in any of this discussion and the reincarnation of Senate Bill 50. As far as land use goes, Palo Alto is attempting to stave off businesses, realizing that they're kind of built out down there. Menlo Park, when you look at the Facebook EIRs, they basically say, well, yeah, we'll accommodate it, and we'll only allow 180 additional off the freeway rides, and well, we'll just defer that to shuttles. So what happens? Genentech says on the back of their buses, this bus removes 120 cars. They forgot the other half of the sentence that said, comma, and displaced 120 working class families in San Francisco. So we have, and now in San Francisco on 24th and Church, we now have 100 commuter bus shuttles, plus all the scofflaw shuttles that are coming through. I'm just amazed at the number of buses that don't have stickers on them. One at 6:50 this morning, it's 5:50 this morning, it's 8:10. All these buses are coming in here and contributing to it. So we just go and never demand that these companies fund their housing, because you turn around and say, well, you know, we don't have housing, so now we're going to require the citizens to fund it with bond issues. This is all upside down. So the businesses fund the housing, and growth should fund housing, because the sustainable fee has been discounted by 75% when the studies were all done. So I leave it with that, and I think you get the drift of what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mason, very much. Next
Okay.
speaker.
And these are for topics that were just discussed.
Okay. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Nina. I live in Soma. I'm just here because I know a lot of my neighbors that I've spoken to are really worried about the fare hike that's coming, and I know about the impact it's going to have on their lives. So I'm just here to make a request. I know that sounds like you all are already considering this, and that you know you face a lot of problems. I'm just here to request that you really think about ways that maybe one can get creative to try to lessen the impact on these people's lives, because I know it's really hard. I've been talking to a lot of my actual living flesh and blood neighbors about it, so just here to make a request that the impact on them be really taken to heart and considered as much as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker,
And
please.
hold on just a moment, just for the record, the fare policy will be discussed later on this afternoon. Yes, sure.
We did, that's fair. Thank you so much. Please,
Okay. With regard to your revenue
could
difficulties.
you tell us your name, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sarah Greenwald.
Welcome, Ms. Greenwald.
Thank you. With regard to the financial difficulties just mentioned, I wanted to just say that one does not hear the term climate raised, and the city has declared a climate emergency. So I recommend that you consider what the role of the transit riders are climate heroes. I want that considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good morning. My name is Carla Mays.
Welcome.
I live in the Yerba Buena area, and we've discussed the budget. One of the things for folks in my neighborhood is that we have a lot of scooter and bike programs, but we have not addressed ADA, safety and cleanliness, and lighting. In our neighborhood, we have a lot of transit, especially our third in Market area, as well as our third and Mission area, have a lot of transit, but what we don't have, and we don't have, is a lot of focus on cleanliness, lighting, a lot of, we have more homeless and more situations of safety. And so with the budget, we see that there's a lot of projects being done in our neighborhood around biking and scooters, but not a lot of attention being spent on safety, cleanliness, and ADA access. And so one of the things is that these projects in our neighborhood are, sometimes $600, $700 million projects, and they are not considering the needful. And so what I really need is for, what we really need in our neighborhood is for the focus to be less on these pilot projects that cost a lot of money and really focused on the needful, which is ADA access, lighting, police coverage, and cleanliness. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mays, for those very thoughtful comments. Anyone else on public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment. We'll thank our guests.
Thank you.
On to the next item, 7, presentation discussion regarding the 2019 travel decision survey.
Good morning. You're welcome to the podium or the hot seat. It's totally your choice.
Actually,
I like
speakers,
the hot seat.
speakers, if all the speakers are up there, so since we were videotaping.
Good morning, directors. My name is Sarah Jones. I'm the planning director here at the SFMTA. And we're going to be talking now about mode share and mode split. We look at mode split because it is important to understand how everything is coming together. It is perhaps our most important metric as an agency because our success in living our values depends on doing well around mode. So most of the metrics that we look at and talk about are about how we're doing as an agency or the outcome of a project or a program. But the Travel Decisions Survey is a little bit different because it's looking at the state of travel overall in the city. It's really looking at whether all of our collective work around transportation, around land use, and beyond is getting us to the goals that San Francisco needs to achieve. So in the presentation you're about to see about the Travel Decision Survey, what you're going to see is a summary of one way that we understand mobility, and there's going to be further information forthcoming within the broader mobility report that will be coming out in the coming months. So like any good planning tool, the Travel Decision Survey is not an end. It's a way for us to understand where there is work to be done. So the results that you're about to see are going to show you that indeed there is much work to be done. And for the rest of the day, you're going to be talking about some of what that work needs to involve. So I'm going to turn it over to Monica Munowich. She manages the complete streets section and planning, and she's going to be presenting this great work that her team has completed.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, Chair Harneke, Vice Chair Board, and members of the board. I'm thrilled to be here presenting the results of our Travel Decision Survey today, and as Sarah mentioned and framing the discussion, this truly is one of our most important metrics, and we've committed to this in our strategic plan. Objective 2.2 commits us to achieving an 80% sustainable mode share target by 2030. So a long way to go in the next 10 years, and so we track this through hiring a, sorry everybody, it's behind me, I'm not prepared for this. So we hire a polling firm each year to conduct a telephone survey to get track reported trips on on their travel in a certain time period. And so we've done this survey every year since 2012. And most recently, we shifted to a biannual survey. So this is important, as you'll see it reflected in the great shift that we've seen in the last 2 years since 2017. So another important shift I want to make sure you all are aware of is that we are no longer defining the sustainable modes as private and non-private. We've shifted to sustainable and non-sustainable. And this means that we've made the determination for this year's survey that TNCs are in the non-sustainable category. This is something that we're very complex and we're still trying to understand due to limited data. It's been difficult to truly understand the impacts that shared mobility like TNCs have on our streets. So we're currently undertaking a more robust effort to truly understand the definition of a sustainable trip. But for the purpose of this year's survey, we made the determination that TNCs is in this category.
And for the public, TNC stands for
Oh,
Transportation
Network Company. Thank you,
as
Jeff.
in Uber or Lyft.
That's correct. So now that I've set the context, the sustainable mode share that we saw in the 2019 survey was 47%. This is reflected in blue in the graph to the right. And this change since 2017 is because of a decrease in sustainable trips from transit and walking, and an increase in non-sustainable trips from forms like TNC, carpool, and driving alone. Bicycling remained relatively steady. So over time, this graph shows that for the first time since we've been collecting this data, we dip below 50%. That 47% is the first time we dip this low. And so clearly we have a long way to go in the next 10 years to achieve our 80% sustainable mode share target. And just to make sure it's clear, this graph reflects the current mode share definitions. We went back and, right, that's correct. So that 47% number that you see in 2017 has TNCs included in that for accurate comparison. So we compared the survey data to SFMTA model data to get an idea of actual trips in the city, and this graph shows that actual daily trips are increasing over time, which means that not just the percent of non-sustainable trips is increasing, the total number of daily non-sustainable trips is increasing. So between 2017 and 2019 alone, that's 400,000 more trips in a car, that's 400,000 more people driving on our streets. This survey also collects important demographic information like income, and this is really important for us to understand and assess as we try to grapple and understand the change in mode share. Understanding how different people travel is critical. So in this graph, the blue cells show over 50% sustainable mode share, so this is the positive direction we want to see, and that top row shows San Francisco as a whole. Only the lowest income brackets have that good higher level of sustainable mode share we want to see, and the middle and higher income brackets are not. Drilling down a little bit deeper, zones 4 and 5, which is the southeast and southwest part of the city, which is notably an area part of the city that does not have high quality and access to multimodal transportation, has not sustainable levels of transportation mode share across all income brackets. So before I end, some additional information we wanted to pull, and Jeff alluded to this earlier this morning. We took some information from the mobility report that the agency is currently in the process of developing to drill down a little bit deeper into the transit trends that we're seeing, since the travel decision survey does not differentiate between transit modes. So looking at ridership, we see that, yes, we see declines everywhere. Muni is decreasing 0.5% in the last year, a full percent in the last 2 years, which is less than what we're seeing nationwide and the other forms of transit serving San Francisco, like BART and Caltrain AC Transit. But the one place we're not seeing this decrease is where we're making investments in the network. So Muni Rapids saw a 4% growth in the last year and a 14% growth in the last 2 years. So where we're giving people better options, they're taking it. And this is the type of trends and results we want to see where we're making transit reliability improvements on our network. So in conclusion, this survey shows us that more people are choosing cars, and in a space where we are clear of what drives us at the MTA: equity, Vision Zero, climate sustainability, transit first. Not a single one of these can be achieved without reducing driving and the need to drive. So it is our clear responsibility now more than ever to have alignment and commitment to our values to help us do the difficult work that has real trade-offs. This is what we think will require real change. Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions?
Board members, please, Director Eakin.
I think looking at some of the other kind of premier transit agencies around the world, I think Transport for London has an 80% sustainable trips goal, but I think there's 2041. They're at like mid 60%. And when you ask them, are we going to hit 80%? They say yes, with confidence. We are going to hit that number, and we have a pathway. So I wanted to ask you, given now I understand some of it's due to recategorization, but we have 80% goal by 2030. Do we have a pathway that you both really believe in to get to 80% by 2030? And what's that going to take?
I guess the first thing I'll say is I think what Jeff said this morning really resonated about we have to have good data and transparency to be able to track this. And I think having metrics like this is vital. But I think that we still have a lot of information and work to go to reach that target. 10 years is not that far away.
And I would add to that, at this point in time, I would say, no, we don't have that pathway to get there. I mean, being completely honest and frank. And that's what a lot of the work that we are doing within the agency overall, and kind of the focus of our planning work is about setting out that pathway. That's what Connect SF is about. That's what our upcoming climate action strategy is about. That is what that's what Muni Forward is about. That is what all of our work is about, is collectively making the choice to get to where we can have an 80% mode share.
Yeah, and given that this is a key part of the city's overall climate action strategy, is this 80% by 2030, I think it would be great to do a little bit of sort of scenario analysis of what are the big pieces, that kind of like a pie chart, what are the big pieces that could get us to that 2030 80%. And I think if you look at the numbers from congestion charge in London and Stockholm, you saw a pretty significant mode shift resulting from that kind of policy. So if we were to build out our strategy, what are the big components that might add up to that 80%? It'd be really interesting to look at a couple of different potential pathways.
Yeah, and that is absolutely what a lot of the work around Connect SF, and particularly our sister agency at the SFMTA, is looking towards, for sure.
Director Heminger?
Yeah, I have two comments. The first, I'm having difficulty putting carpooling in the non-sustainable category. Number one, if we went from primarily the driver being alone in the vehicle in this town to a situation where it's the driver plus two or three, that seems to me to be a sustainable shift. Secondly, that statement's at odds, or that categorization is at odds with what policies we've introduced at the regional level. The place I used to work, as well as the Golden Gate Bridge, they give people a discount if they're carpooling to come into town. And this would suggest that they should stop doing that. So that's one comment. The second one has to do with your last slide. And I think you make the statement, less driving is fundamental to achieving our goals. And in general, I agree with that. I think it would be useful to test that, though, against some of the work. The one that I'm most familiar with is Dan Sperling, who's a professor at UC Davis. And he talks about 3 revolutions coming to automobility, right? One of them is electrification, a second is automation, and a third is the shift from owning to sharing vehicles. And I think probably a statement that's a little less categorical than less driving is a good per se. If the fleet is electrified, I think you've taken care of some of the externalities that accompany driving. You've still got congestion. You might have clean congestion. So that's the second comment, is that I think it would be worthwhile, maybe add a few more scenarios to Director Eakin's, to look at those 3 factors and how they might change the calculus of what's sustainable and what's not.
Thank you very much. Director Torres?
Will we receive a copy of these, of this information data? can you clear up something for me? I get so many conflicting information from the press and from others that bicycle ridership is going down in San Francisco. What do you think is causing that?
So the first thing I think else to set the stage, I think we've seen a very inconsistent sort of, it has been going down. The most recent census data has actually shown it has gone up. So I think it's hard to tell that in general, I think it's steady, right? We've seen some declines, some increases, and I think we just have a really difficult time competing with the very accessible and convenient way of TNCs. I think a lot of the younger population that traditionally were big people out riding bikes, we're seeing a shift to transportation network company use. I think that's just part of it. Obviously, the importance of making sure our facilities are protected and safe is critical, but I think we're in the most competitive sort of space than ever to compete with all the different mobility options out there. And bicycling needs to keep up.
Well, we need to revisit what we do with the state legislature in terms of the TNCs, because it is outrageous that local entities and jurisdictions can't have any control over their functioning. And I know I've spoken to Andrea in terms of dealing with congestive pricing and whether or not that's an option as well as we move forward. Well, thank you for your work.
Vice Chair Borden?
I have a question. We don't really talk about trip time, and I think that trip time is actually probably like one of the most critical factors, I think, in how people make decisions. And maybe, in looking at this data, how can we have a better sense of what people's average trip times in various modes are, and then what people find to be acceptable trip times? Because, I think there's two problems. One is that the TNC culture has created this 3-minute or less, people don't want to wait very long for transit to show up or from them to access transit. So better understanding how that is influencing people's decision to take transit, take a taxi, to even use other sustainable modes that like a bike share, like how far the pod has to be, how far is the pod from their house, that makes a difference whether or not they choose to take that. So I think that's the number one. And the number two related to that is what do people find to be a reasonable trip time to go, say, to work, or for most of their, sort of basic errands that they have to take care of. Because I think if we can have a better understanding and understand if our system is calibrated so that people can achieve those kind of expectations of time, right? I think that helps us better plan things and also look at where we plan more rapid service or, maybe other times of day when we didn't think that we needed it, because not everybody works the 9-to-5 shift. There are people who are, I live along the 14 line. The buses are packed at night because people are getting off from work, right? So there could be different decisions made if we had, I think, better information about what informs people's decision-making around trip time and plans.
Director Brinkman.
That's interesting. I agree with that the trip time, as Director Rame said, people can get to downtown San Francisco more quickly from Oakland area than they can from the outer reaches of our city. So our policies and our values really need to sort of consider the trips. And about the carpools, yes, if we moved every single private automobile trip on the Bay Bridge to a multi-person per vehicle, because if you take the buses across the bridge and you look down into the cars, I would say each car is at 20% capacity, because there's a 5-seater car with one driver, and that's, for the most part, that's it. And so they're encouraging to carpool there. So I think we do need to make the distinction. Does it make sense to encourage people to carpool from the avenues into downtown San Francisco? That's a different calculation than to carpool from a further drive where they're coming across the Bay Bridge. So I agree with you that shifting those longer trips to carpool that helps, but do we want to encourage people to take even an electric vehicle on a trip that could be better and more sustainably and more climate-friendly served by transit? So I think that's kind of the math we need to look at. So it's important to roll all of that in and make the distinction between what we're trying to do with our, what will we call it, inner city trips or intra-city trips versus trips coming into the city. And those kind of are two different things to think about. I think this is great work. Moving the TNC trips to non-sustainable, I totally support that because I think all the data has shown that with the empty miles that they travel and the deadheading and the travel into the city, those are actually adding vehicle miles traveled to our region and to our state. So I think this is good work, and I would encourage all of us. I do every single one of these workshops. It's easy to look at this and it's easy to nod, but then when the hard decisions come to us and we actually have to say, yes, make those street changes, yes, prioritize that mode over that mode, that's where it comes down to the where we have to put our courage to the sticking point and agree to this, not just in theory, but in practice when the changes come to us. So thank
Right.
you.
So I will give a brief perspective on that before we move on, which is, having done this for now over a decade, I think there might be some thought that with the city's growth, with the city's wealth, that congestion would just become so bad that transit would be, people would have to take it because you just didn't, the non-sustainable options were not personally sustainable, let alone globally sustainable. We're not seeing that. We have to provide our customers an option that they want to take over the non-sustainable option. We have to respond to our customers and meet their needs. Hardly a surprising conclusion for a business to reach, but certainly one that I think we should reach, and exactly as Director Brinkman says, when we go forward with these changes, really look at, is this going to drive ridership? Is this something that our riders want? So with that, we do have a schedule that we're trying to keep to. So is there any public comment on this wonderful presentation we've had on the Travel Decision Survey?
On the
Please
travel
come
deci-
on forward.
So this is only on the topic just before.
Correct.
Welcome, sir.
Hi, I'm Bob Feinbaum. I'm president of Save Muni. This work, I understand, was done by a survey of San Franciscans, correct?
That's correct.
And yet San Francisco is not an island. And I think if you look at the causes of congestion, yes, driving by San Franciscans certainly is a cause, but I think MTC data shows that more automobiles are coming into San Francisco from outside of San Francisco than are driven by San Franciscans absent the TNCs. Therefore, I think you really need, and Director Brinkman hit on this, I think you really need to look at this as a regional approach. That you have to look at the vast number of automobiles, I think it's estimated at 280,000, that are coming in from San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. That's really crucial to San Francisco. So looking at it in isolation as only a San Francisco issue, I think sort of misses the point. You really have to take it as a regional issue and regional perspective and look at those automobiles that are coming in from elsewhere as part of the driving problem. I'll probably have more to say about this later on in specifics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Feinbaum. Next speaker, please.
Can I respond or
No.
clarify? Clarify?
You may
Sorry, not
clarify.
I can clarify.
Please.
Sorry. Apologies for any confusion. Yes, the survey is of San Francisco residents, but it does include trips in and outside and coming into San Francisco. So agree with your point. It is covered in the survey. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Christopher Peterson. On the issue about carpools, their sustainability and whether they should be encouraged. I used to live in Oakland. I used to be a regular rider of the AC Transit Transbay service. I think you should be very cautious before regarding carpools as sustainable or things to be encouraged. I think it's a very nuanced situation. Certainly in the casual carpooling context, I think very often its effect has been to take riders away from BART and AC Transit in the morning and encourage people to drive who otherwise wouldn't drive if they weren't able to take advantage of the HOV lanes. And that's demonstrated by in the afternoon, the passengers are overwhelmingly then taking transit back to the East Bay, and people are driving back to the East Bay alone. The Transbay buses, the ridership is dramatically lower, and the service is dramatically less frequent in the morning than in the afternoon, precisely because of how casual carpooling affects those dynamics. So that's one example of where I think it's important to be very careful about how you characterize and encourage or discourage carpools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Mason, is there anyone else who wishes to speak in public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none. Oh, okay, Mr. Strauss. Mr. Mason, floor is
Thank you.
yours.
Edward Mason. We have a culture of convenience that's been enabled by technology. So we can tap the app and magically something appears to satisfy my requirement. However, we never make the connection between that decision, your travel decision, and the environment. When you tap the app, you don't realize that that travel decision really originated in maybe Sacramento or Modesto. That pollution plume extends back there to satisfy your immediate need. Santa Clara County has refitted their transit system. It'll be interesting to see. They've increased routes to 15 and 20 minutes in frequency. Whether that's going to encourage anything, I don't know. I think we need to take a lesson from Santa Clara County with their theme of keeping the valley green. We do not make the connection between transportation and the environment. And I think we have an opportunity within MTA to somehow keep the valley green. So that needs to be the connection and the loop. There was an old picture that was in the West Side Observer that showed a muni bus at West Portal Station. And in there, it says, there was a bus parked there, and it says, basically, it's your transit, use it. So we don't extol that very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good morning, Peter Strauss. Very quickly, I strongly support your moving TNCs to the non-sustainable modes. I have a hard time seeing how car share per se is sustainable, though. On the issue of carpools, just as we don't believe in two-person carpools, certainly two-person carpools are non-sustainable. I would argue that three also are appropriately non-sustainable, but you might want to address van pools, and where vans fit in this thing. I'm not sure how I feel about them, but it sort of falls in between, and you might want to just address that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mays, welcome back.
Thank you. I want to address the TNC question. I know in my neighborhood, we have a 98% walk score, but it's become more dangerous for us to be able to walk. Like I said, there's been a lot of, we've been taking more Uber, Pool, and Lyft because of the fact that, there's not been a lot of thought through the ADA questions, through the cleanliness issues, and the safety issues. And so the challenge is that the stops are not where they need to be. They're not lit. And a lot of times in my area, we end up taking TNCs as a safety precaution. And so I want this to be, it's something that I don't like paying for them. But the issue is that it's that the safety issues, and I think a lot of times we're a lot of times thinking about the sustainability, and we're not thinking about what kind of San Francisco we live in, with the opiate crisis and the cleanliness crisis and the things. And so what I would argue with you on is please keep, look at TNCs as right now an option, and that's something that we need to be having access to, because paratransit doesn't work very well, and we have not figured out our disability access. And a lot of folks in my neighborhood, that's what they're using. And then they also are trying to connect to areas that Muni doesn't serve very well. So please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very
Equity
much.
issue.
All right, next speaker, please. Welcome, sort of a hall of fame of transit people here today.
So Tom Radilovich, Executive Director of Livable City. I think one of the challenges, and I've looked at this document and sort of watched, some of these modes on the border get, like they're in the sustainable category, they're not. I think that idea that sustainability is a binary, right? Everything on this side of the line is 100% sustainable, and everything on this side of the line is 100% sustainable might be your problem. So maybe, when I look at this model, I think, okay, driving alone in your own car, well, that, you have a big impact on the environment. You're taking up a lot of space, so you really need to think about space on the roadway as a resource. And an electric car takes up as much space as a fossil fueled car. You need to think about the embodied energy in these vehicles, right? So, maybe the same number of trips driven in fewer vehicles or shared vehicles is a win. So kind of beginning to think about, less, more unsustainable, less unsustainable, sustainable, and then, the idea of just moving people, in their choices towards the more sustainable modes. Like, how can you, if, for example, somebody gave up their private car that they were driving a lot, and then they started taking taxis and TNCs, but we're also taking transit and walking more, well, you can say, okay, well, it's a harm reduction, paradigm, right? So some things are getting better. The harm is reduced. If somebody starts taking TNCs that was formerly taking transit, well, then they're moving in the wrong direction. So I think just being more strategic, a little more nuanced here is good. I mean, I guess, you have a magic number. 80% is the number that we think we want to get to of sustainable trips. But the idea of how to get there, might see people switching modes in kind of this harm reduction way. And you're going to be strategic about it. Think about how these modes can complement each other and how you can get folks to the least damaging, most space efficient, and most benign modes.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for all the work that you're doing in this area. No further public comment on this item. We'll close public comment on item 7. We'll thank Sarah and Monica. And Monica, that was extremely efficiently presented, so thank you for that. Very digestible the way you presented it.
Discussion
and Lee,
regarding
you are
the
up.
regarding the SFMTA's operational and financial challenges.
Okay, good morning, directors. Tom McGuire, Sustainable Streets Director.
Julie Kirschbaum, Transit Director.
So we are here to talk to you about some of the challenges that we face leading the two largest operating divisions of the MTA as we try to progress towards the strategic goals that we've been talking about this morning. I think as Jeff said, there are some significant challenges in front of us. He laid out the framework. We're here to fill in the details to let you know what we hope you're thinking about, what we as your staff think you need to be thinking about as you make some really tough decisions about the budget in the weeks and months ahead. However, we thought we should begin with a couple of successes. 2019 was a challenging year in a lot of ways, but it had a couple of really bright spots, and I want to make sure we acknowledge those before we get into the real hard stuff. Two of the most exciting days I spent in 2019 were the opening of the Chase Center and the day we spent together approving Better Market Street. We opened the Chase Center. I remember Julie and I standing up at the top of the Chase Center Plaza at about 11 o'clock at night with Joe Fitz-Rodriguez from the Examiner. I think Julie and I knew the plan was going to work. We've been preparing for that moment for months. But you're always a little bit nervous, and seeing the crowd stream out of the arena and seeing hundreds and hundreds of MTA employees driving trains, dispatching trains, directing traffic, fare inspectors, PCOs, engineers, planners. It was fantastic to see the agency come together, and that's the kind of moment that we need a lot more of. All the different functions of the agency functioning together to achieve a really challenging goal. The other, of course, was the approval of Better Market Street, which you'll start to see go into effect tomorrow morning on the street, so I won't say any more about that. Also, just to give in the spirit of strengthening the collaboration between the streets and traffic side of the MTA and the transit side of the MTA, Julie and I are going to try to talk about each other's division's biggest accomplishments in 2019. So I'm going to talk about what I saw as the best things that happened to transit.
You get to go second. That's your benefit. You could just he didn't do anything.
She's going to give a shorter list. So this is fun for me because I get to give a longer list. We expanded our fleet. We are at the end of a 7-year period where we've brought over 800 new buses online. And we have the most reliable bus fleet we've ever had. We have increased by 45% the number of LRVs in service right now. We brought 68 new LRVs online in the last 2 years, and that generational change in the fleet is so important for our customers and so important for reliability. We've improved services. We got rid of switchbacks on the T3rd. We brought Muni-forward improvements to multiple lines, 3rd Street downtown, a really clever new transit-only lane on 4th Street, including some traffic calming benefits, as well as San Bruno Avenue, the 27 Bryant. We brought real meaningful service improvements to our customers. And then our management. In addition to the fleet management, we've also begun to dig our way out of that challenging hole of the operator shortage. 200 new operators that Julie's team brought online this year, and I think you have a fully functional TMC for the first time, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the good news from the transit side. I'll let Julie talk about the more modest list on the sustainable street side.
You did have another job this year.
We're the reason Tom and I are able to do this is because of the amazing and unique structure of our agency, which is fundamental to us being able to move the needle on some of our biggest challenges. And everything that we do is in partnership, and it may not always be visible, but there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work and collaboration that's happening, which is why I'm so proud of everything that the Streets Division delivered this year. I think first and foremost being the Quick Build program, which got safety moving faster. 9 projects were delivered in 2019, with more coming in 2020. We retimed a third of the city's traffic lights to make it safer to walk and to slow down driving, which helps keep people alive. With community input, the Vision Zero Action Strategy was adopted. It includes 58 strategies that's going to help us reach our ambitious goals of ending traffic violence. The Safe Routes to School program was expanded to almost over 100, all of our SFUSD schools, helping to make it safer for kids to get to school and also to start walking early. Part of some of the themes you're going to hear today is really building good habits when people are young. In addition to enhancing safety, we really appreciate the leadership of this board adopting the security contract. This represents a significant investment in the security of our staff and of our facilities. It's also going to enhance subway operations. And then finally, we help give people more travel choices, but we did it in a way that complemented and didn't compromise other modes. So things like having scooters that lock, for example, is going to help us, roll out in the next couple of weeks. We'll be seeing almost 4,000 scooters on our streets, and more electric bikes this spring. So those types of investments are part of what we're so proud of for this agency. But that being said, and that's the good news, and we started with the successes, mostly because we didn't want to be too depressing, but also because we wanted to highlight that in spite of our problems, we do know what works. And where we have made investments, we have succeeded and seen tremendous amount of success. But we still have significant challenges ahead. Today is about being honest about those challenges and working through them and bringing real solutions to address them. Our most important indicator of challenges is how our multimodal customers experience the system every day. And I think it speaks to Director Heineke's comments, which is that in order for people to truly choose sustainable modes, we need to work through these frustrations so that they have excellent choices. Things like traffic violence, lack of protected infrastructure, a transit system that still has too much crowding and unpredictability, time lost circling for parking or stuck in congestion, whether you're on a bus or in a car. These are some of the challenges that our system faces. And as an agency, beyond the specific customer frustrations, what we're also hearing is concerns that we take very, very seriously about lack of responsiveness and communications. Although we've made, I think, a strong focus on equity, we know that there are still some very real gaps that need to be addressed. And we also need to balance the need to really get as many new projects out as quickly as we can, and also the reality that there is a lot of construction fatigue. Not just in our projects, but also in the building boom and kind of the overall expansion environment that we're in.
Okay, so Julie's talked about what these concerns look like from the customers and from the public's point of view, we've batched them into some areas where we think we know what we need to fix and where we want to tee these up for a little more robust discussion with the board leading into the budget. I'm not going to read all the items on this list because each of them has its own slide and we want to get into the substance of it. So let's start with safety. We made our Vision Zero commitment in 2014. That year we were losing over 30 people a year on our streets. We have seen a very slight decrease on average in fatalities in San Francisco, but the number is not dropping nearly fast enough. We're halfway to that 2024 date that we promised back in 2014, and we're still losing over 20 San Franciscans on the street every year. There are some silver linings. I think the point Jeff made at the beginning is really important. The places where we've made investments in safety, the place where this board has told us to make those challenging trade-offs between traffic flow, parking availability, and safety, we have been able to move the needle and reduce fatalities. But the high injury network has over 120 miles of streets on it, and it's a challenge to get to all of it. Here's how we compare to some other big cities. You could look at this graph and say, well, at least we're not as bad as DC and LA. I look at this graph and say, hey, why are we not as good as New York or Boston? Or frankly, why are we not at zero? Why are we not the bottom city on this graph? And that's going to be the challenge that we're thinking about a 2-year budget cycle now. So 2 of the 5 years we have to reach zero are covered by this budget, and we need to be very cognizant of the need to accelerate our actions. Won't rehash all the notes that Monica and Sarah gave such a great presentation on the mode shift, but the declining, the increasing number of cars in the city, 400,000 more cars in the street every day, is directly related to the fatalities and the increasing number of crashes and collisions we see on the street. Simply physics. This is a 49 square mile peninsula. You cannot fit 400,000 cars, 400,000 more car trips a day into it and not expect more conflict and more danger. And so both the mode share and the safety goal are inextricably linked.
Our director of HR is going to take a deeper dive into this afternoon, but as an agency, we have no more acute challenge than our vacancy rate, with over 800 positions that are waiting to be filled. We really need to take some critical steps in how we manage our hiring pipeline in order to deliver an excellent product. But I would also say that I think there is a silver lining in here, and that this does represent a tremendous opportunity as we bring on new staff to also make sure that we are rebuilding and reshaping the agency's culture, renewing our commitment to service delivery and some of the core principles driving this agency. The overall staffing picture is mirrored by the operator shortage, which is our most important building block to service. A lot of the investment that we're making to turn this trend is in we're using our current resources for. So we have a small recommendation for next year's budget, but this has been our biggest focus is changing this trajectory, and we continue to be on track to start classes every 5 weeks in the end of February. In addition to our human capital, our infrastructure also faces challenges. This graph shows our state of good repair backlog. Through a really deliberate set of investment policies, we have managed our transit service critical assets, so you don't see the backlog increasing as rapidly, but our state of good repair needs to continue to climb, and you'll see the needs of our non-transit service critical assets. The backlog continues to grow as our investment rates are not keeping pace with our state of good repair needs. Within transit, while we have tackled key problems like the vehicles, and I'm excited about the continued investment in things like new trains, we still have some very major capital needs, and you'll see that throughout this next several months as we go through the budget process. But the most important of which is the train control system, which we shared earlier this month. The combination of our staffing and our infrastructure challenges ultimately are leading to poor performance. I think this is indicated in the subway travel times and in our travel time variability. If people can't count on getting to work or getting to an appointment, they start to look for other choices, and we see that start to bleed into some of the mode share results. Additionally, some of our most successful routes are too crowded. So as we face difficult choices, one of the things you're going to have to look at is what do we allocate towards our existing service, and where do we need expansion? And our system has built-in inequities. These are an issue today, but perhaps even more concerning as we do our Connect SF analysis and we look at the future like 2050, we see those trends getting worse. Director Borden brought up travel time as one of the biggest indicators on how people make choices. And what this graph shows is as if we look at